Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is the 25th day of January. It's Thursday. Today is the 111th day since October 7th. I'm home from just over 2 weeks in the Middle East. And I had the privilege this morning of being present as a part of the Week of Christian Unity with Pastor Samach Maurice from Egypt. If you haven't had the opportunity to watch those videos, they're less than 30 minutes. I'd encourage you to do so. You can find them on our YouTube page. Reverend Dr. Samach Maurice led the devotion this morning. He's the pastor of Qasr al-Dabara Church. This week, this is always the Week of Christian Unity, but we reflected on verses that talk about loving the Lord your God and loving your neighbor as yourself. And this morning, Reverend Dr. Maurice talked about the verses in Genesis that talk about the power of unity. And when people are seeking to speak the same language, that the language of God is a language of love, and that when love unites us and when we're united in God and united in love, that we're truly able to do anything, and that nothing is impossible when we have unity in God. So I was encouraged by his words this morning. I hope you will be encouraged as well. And I thought, especially as we're pursuing peace, peace in the Middle East, peace in our own hearts, peace with our neighbors, that as we're seeking and praying and holding in our hearts the people of Gaza, the people of Israel, the people of Palestine, that we might be encouraged, that we might seek God together, but also seek unity and love, and that in that we could be encouraged that when we have the love of God and that when we're united together, peace is not impossible. And that's an encouragement, because having come from just being on the ground for a couple of weeks, the realities of the world and the realities that are happening in the occupied Palestinian territories, it seems impossible. And, we've been talking a lot about what's been happening there, and I'll give a couple updates in that regard right now. But to go before God in hope and in prayer, and to know that before God, nothing is impossible, may that encourage our spirits and encourage our hearts. In Gaza, the Israeli military has continued its ground offensive, particularly in Younis. It's one of the largest ground offensives they have had in the past month. The UN has claimed that one of its centers was attacked and 9 people were killed and more than 75 people were wounded. They stated, their UN humanitarian coordinator stated, the mass casualties have taken place. Some buildings are ablaze and there were reports of death. Many people have tried to flee the scene and are unable to do so. Thomas White, the director of Gaza for the UN agency of UNRWA, said that 2 tank rounds hit one of the center's buildings where more than 800 displaced people were sheltering. And then the US responded in a rare criticism of the attack and said, we deplore today's attack on the United Nations Khan Younis Training Center. Israel responded and said that it was not their military that had attacked the facility. And so they had denied that was a result of the Israeli Defense Forces. In addition, communications have been cut off in Gaza. It was reported that warnings of the most recent ground offensive came after the offensive had already begun, and locals have reported that those warnings also came through after the main road had already been shut off. And so many people who were trying to flee were unable to leave because of the road having been closed. Reuters reported that Gaza is starving as Israel continues its war against Hamas. A UN-backed report has said that the whole population of Gaza is facing a crisis in terms of level of hunger and the growing risk of famine. Medics in Gaza hospitals have described that babies are sick, and that mothers who are trying to nurse their children are malnourished. Infants are losing significant amounts of weight. Mothers are unable to produce breast milk, and patients are too weak from hunger to be able to fight off infections. In a Rafah hospital ward, Rafah, of course, is south Gaza near the Egyptian border, a pediatric hospital doctor has been citing evidence of children and babies who are losing weight. And so he was talking about an infant, for example, who in a month and a half started out at 16.5 pounds and in 6 weeks lost 4 pounds as a result of just not being able to get enough nutrients. So the situation in Gaza continues to just be dire, which means our work is all the more important. And so for those of you who are continuing to pray, continuing to work, continuing to call on elected officials, continuing to do social action, continuing to write letters to your local newspapers, please continue to do so. If you've not visited our Gaza ceasefire pilgrimage website, I'd encourage you to do so. I know we have 8 countries involved in those thus far. So we have come back from this trip just committed to doing everything we can to call on the White House, the US government to put pressure on Israel to pursue alternative means in regards to their commitments to hold Hamas accountable and to stop their bombing of Gaza and to do everything we can to get immediate and adequate humanitarian assistance to the more than 2 million people who are just suffering increasingly in Gaza. The International Court of Justice, as you know, has heard the case of whether or not Israel is culpable or could potentially be culpable of the crime of genocide. They have reported that that initial verdict will be released tomorrow at 1 p.m. I thought it was Eastern Standard Time. It's actually Hague time, but that will be released. You can go to a site. You can find that link online. I think the United Nations also has that link available, but that is set to happen tomorrow. And then on Capitol Hill, it's been reported that nearly all Democrats support the two-state solution. So all but 2, so 49 of the 51 members of the Senate Democratic Caucus backed an amendment supporting a negotiated solution to the conflict that would result in Israelis and Palestinians living side by side. This would ensure that Israel's survival has a secure, democratic Jewish state and fulfilling the Palestinians' legitimate aspirations for a state of their own. There are, of course, significant obstacles to a two-state solution, including more than 500,000 settlers living in the West Bank, the status of Jerusalem, where the United States under the Trump administration acknowledged the annexation of East Jerusalem, but for Palestinians and the international community, East Jerusalem continues to be considered occupied Palestinian territory. So what happens with Jerusalem? There continues to be a significant lack of will by the Israeli government and also the Israeli people. Those legitimate security challenges that Israel experiences. There continue to be the remaining hostages in Gaza, the lack of a negotiated peace agreement and ceasefire in terms of the Gaza war, not to mention that Israel controls the resources that continue to be in the West Bank, from the Dead Sea to the Aquifer, to the control of the Jordan River, to the other water assets, et cetera, let alone the specific issues of the border, the separation barrier. There are many, many issues that would need to be addressed. But we also know that the way things are now cannot continue. They're untenable. A solution must be sought, and the international community must demand a resolution. And the US for far too long has been saying we won't intervene while a decades-long occupation has continued. So peace, negotiations towards a settlement, an end to war, an end to violence, safety and security must be pursued. That's the only answer. And so we will continue to work toward that end.